Welcome back to the Astrocast. My name is Rue. Today is Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025. We're about 25% through this beautiful waxing crescent moon. She slowly grows in our night sky, waiting to bring ruin. Seriously, though, thank you so much for joining us this week. Have had quite a lot going on in Charlotte. I have finished the pier. That is kind of the big announcement and takeaway from this past weekend. Ended up having finally a good weather day on Saturday and a couple of friends that were able to come by and assist me. And once I had that out of the way, everything else pretty much just fell into place. And it's funny because I had built this up for so long in my head to be this ginormous project. Even strung it out over a year, as you guys know, waiting to do it. And it ended up only taking us about 3 hours, which really surprised me. It wasn't that big of a job. But I will say that had I not had my couple of friends there to help, it would have been a royal pain. Like, I would not have been able to have done this on my own. Maybe if I was 20 years younger and in the kind of shape that I was when I was 20, I would have had no problem. But nowadays my knees hurt and I'm getting kind of old. So anyway, thanks for tuning in this week. I'm your host, Drew. We will be getting deep into the details of what it takes to make your own astrophotography pier. And I'd like to kind of take you through the steps that I was able to accomplish and how I did that, the materials that I used, the process, etc. And then obviously I can link in the show notes, materials and photos and all those sorts of good things. Now, this episode is a little bit weird in that, do you guys remember on last week's show, I had that weird audio artifact thing happening where I was getting that strange clicking noise? Well, that was happening again, and I didn't find out until I was a good, 15 minutes into today's recording. Luckily, I was able to stop it from happening, but unfortunately that meant I had to re-record the intro. So here I am kind of talking over the first portion of the show for a lack of better words. But if you hear me say the same thing twice, that's why. I'm doing my best to kind of cobble it together for the first 15 minutes or so when I was apparently having those issues. It appears to be stemming from multiple inputs being hooked up at the same time. So if I'm only using one mic, that's all I will have plugged in going forward, because you guys know how important audio quality is to me, and it stinks whenever it sounds bad. So yeah, good stuff. So anyway, we got to pour the pier, and the end result is that I now have a 8-inch diameter pier in my side yard, which I'm extremely happy about. So I've actually been able to image on it one night so far, which was last night, which was, I guess, Tuesday night. We had clear skies for a few hours. And since we had them for a few hours and I had a pier, I was not at all upset about having to set up and break down. That initial setup obviously takes just as long as any other setup, if not a little bit longer, because I was doing some cable management and what have you. But when I was done at the end of the night, I just pulled out my Telegizmos 365 cover and I unplugged the rig. I did take the power cord inside just because I didn't want anything hanging, and I don't have a permanent solution in place for that yet. And put the cover over. Tied the little elastic band that they give you around it to make sure that it's nice and secure at the bottom, so bugs and animals can't get in there. I was sitting there thinking like, man, if I left this thing wide open at the bottom without tying it shut, I bet you a squirrel would get in there and just destroy everything. But luckily they thought about that too, and they give you the proper equipment with those covers. So you don't have to worry about that. So Yeah, I ended up leaving my entire rig outside. It was such a weird feeling because I've been doing this for 5 years and I've never once left my gear outside like that. So it was definitely an interesting feeling. I live in a very safe neighborhood, luckily, and it's behind lock and key, so you can't really easily get through my gate. It's a very tall gate. It's behind lock and key, etc. So I'm not really worried about that. I also have motion sensors and cameras set up, so I will always be aware of what's happening. And then if there's ever any like severe weather, obviously I'll bring it in. I'm not going to leave it out there for a crazy strong thunderstorm, which honestly in North Carolina happens a lot more often than I'd like. Particularly in the summertime, we get, a thunderstorm pretty much every afternoon, and the late summer, that's just commonplace around here. So we'll see how it goes. But I thought it might be fun to take you guys through the process now that I've experienced it, and tell you about some potential pitfalls that you might run into if and when you decide to pour your own pier. And then also, the easiest way that I found to do certain things. One huge tip is to rent a concrete mixer. I cannot stress that enough. That probably saved us more time and energy than any other tip or trick that I could possibly give you. It was the best $60 I think I've ever spent as far as, avoiding manual labor by paying a few bucks. So I have a Home Depot that's, 5 minutes away from the house, and I was able to order it online and schedule it for pickup the same day. And I just went up a couple hours later. They helped me load it into the back of my truck. And it's just a standard, electric cement mixer, not a huge one by any means. You could fit about 2 bags of concrete, 50-pound bags inside of it. And then, I just was able to use that for just $60, like I say. So you can't really beat that. I did take out insurance on it for $8 just in case I broke it, so I wouldn't have to fork over whatever ungodly sum they think a cement mixer costs. I am one who usually does not rent tools. I love owning tools. I've got a lot of tools that I've acquired over the years, but a cement mixer is just not something that I need to own. So renting one makes sense, because while I might pour another pier in the future at some point, I could definitely see having 2 back there instead of just one, or maybe, if I ever purchase a piece of land or build one down at the observatory, then it could come in handy. But again, it's so rare that I have to actually pour concrete. And I think they had a Ryobi one that looked nice for like a regular, home use kind of workload, and it was about $350. So a lot of money. Just spend the $60 and rent the concrete mixer if you're going to do it, and you certainly will not regret it. So why don't we first talk about the advantages of having a pier? Because I found out while doing this process and talking to people that a lot of people don't know what a lot of the advantages are. And while it seems obvious to me, having done astrophotography and astronomy for as long as I have, I could completely understand if you weren't really sure about why you may want one. And let me tell you all about it. So that way, if you're kind of on the fence, it might help you make your mind up. So for me personally, the biggest issue that I had was setup and breakdown time. So no matter how good I am at setting up or breaking down, pretty much no matter what, it would take 20 to 30 minutes for me to set up. So that would include, pulling my tripod out, putting the mount on top of the tripod, putting the telescope on top of the mount, running power cable outside, connecting to the internet if need. Well, I guess that happens automatically when you turn the ASIR on. But in any case, it took about half an hour to set up. So a lot of nights when I would, be done with work and I would look at the forecast, maybe we got clear skies until about midnight. I don't really want to set up in those conditions, because if it takes me half an hour to set up, half an hour to break down, and it's a work night, I'm just like, that's not really worth it for me. And, if it's a early morning hour situation where, like, let's say it's going to clear up at 3:00 in the morning, and you're going to have clear skies for 3 hours. But obviously you would like to sleep for those 3 hours. Well, having a pier eliminates the worry about that, because I can actually, set up the plan in advance and then have it start automatically. Or if I'm worried about potential weather, I could just wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, take the cover off and get started and then go back to bed. So another one of the big advantages included with setup time is that you do not have to polar align every single time you set up. Let me say that again. You don't have to polar align every night. That's a very big deal because polar alignment, while not particularly difficult once you learn how to do it, it can be a bit time consuming, particularly on the ASI Air. I'm not a huge fan of the way the ASI Air handles polar alignment. I will say it's very easy to do. But I kind of struggle with the accuracy of it. Sometimes the guiding numbers won't be great. Sometimes they will be great. And oftentimes I'm like, I'm under a minute. I usually try to get under 30, 20 seconds when I'm doing polar alignment. But I would still see mixed results. And, a lot of that can come down to a lot of different things other than just polar alignment. But it's just one more thing that you can kind of remove from the equation. Because if you've got a very solid pier that your mount is sitting on and you've got it connected correctly to the mount, it shouldn't really be shifting at all from one day to the next. Now, will you have to occasionally make little tweaks? Yeah, of course. I mean, bolts move, things get shimmied and, things happen and things will, occasionally shift out of place. But, that being said, it isn't going to be much at all for the adjustments that you'll have to make. And ultimately, you'll be spending less than a minute to polar align, if that, once you're sitting on top of a pier. Another advantage that I had not really considered until I was, reading about piers and the advantages that they bring is that you get a much more stable surface to image from. So, if you have a tripod and typically image out in your driveway, like I was doing, if the lightest breeze comes by, generally speaking, your guiding numbers, will notice it. And now that I'm on a concrete pier, it is much, much less susceptible, to windage than it otherwise would be. So I can handle a light breeze now, no problem. And I'll keep guiding, with the best of them. So there's some other advantages to that. But for me, the main one was just having a permanent installation and not having to constantly worry about setup and takedown. Now that I can set up in literally 2 minutes, there will be no excuses for me not to be able to image whenever I want. And I plan to automate that even more to where I won't have to really have any setup time because I'm going to be working with our partners at Dark Dragons Astronomy to actually automate my observatory for the roll-off roof. So if you don't know, Dark Dragons actually specializes in observatory roof systems, and they have excellent software that you can use completely independent of your system. Actually, a web page that you can just log into to see whether or not your observatory is open. You can open it, you can close it, check the conditions, etc. And it's not dependent on any gear that you have, like an ASI Air, for example. So it's always there, it's always online, and it's always ready to go. So I'll definitely be utilizing Dark Dragons when I get to the portion where I'm ready to automate the roll-off roof. So to be clear, I don't have any kind of building around the pier yet. For now, as I stated earlier, I'm just using a Telegizmos 365 cover. We talked about those a few weeks back ago on the show, and I explained that they're not inexpensive by any means, but what is in astronomy? But they are extremely high quality with, a great reflective surface to keep your gear cool while it's outside, as waterproof as you can possibly come as far as that's concerned. Extremely good at handling water. They have photos and videos on their website showing people, covered in snow, their Telegizmos covers are, and they're holding up just fine. So, after seeing conditions like that, I figured being down in the South, I should be fine. Although I will say on the really, really hot days, I might consider bringing my gear in just so, cords don't melt and those sorts of things. But it's still, early spring here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Maybe mid-spring now would actually be a fair statement. But we have enough cool weather that I should be perfectly fine until I get that that small building made. And I am planning on doing something on the smaller end. I'd really like to just have quite literally a, plywood dog house around it for all intents and purposes, where I can just roll the building directly off on rails or the roof. I haven't decided yet. You can go a couple of different ways with that, and we'll talk about what those options are. But I'm essentially going to be building a small, 4x4 type size building around it, maybe a little bigger than 4x4, depending on, how much room I need. And I want to be able to plan for the future, obviously, with a SQA 55 telescope and a CEM 26 or Star Adventure GTI small-ish mounts that I have. 8-inch is a little bit overkill. I mean, it could certainly handle a large, Edge HD telescope, no problem. So I want to make sure that I build for the future as well. So I have no doubt at some point I will get a planetary rig, because I love looking at Jupiter and Mars and Venus and, all of those beautiful sights in our night sky. But I'm just not there yet. I'm still having a blast with wide field astrophotography. But when I get there, I want to make sure that my observatory can handle it, which is why I decided to go with an 8-inch tube instead of a 6-inch tube, which I think would have been fine for my current purpose. But having those extra couple of inches is just not a bad idea. And let's not make any lewd jokes, because it's just way too easy right here. All right, so let me tell you about the actual process for getting this pier installed. And if you guys are interested, I could actually leave a parts list in the show notes. I'll put together a basic one. If you want me to get really in depth, shoot me an email at astrocast@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to tell you more about it if you do have any questions. And I might put up a video on YouTube this weekend if I have time, just kind of showing what I did, but we'll see about that when we get there. All right. So first thing that you want is a couple of friends. I can tell you right now, me being, 40 years old, as you guys know, and probably not the peak fitness guy, I guess would be a nice way of putting it. I do exercise daily, but I've still got a little bit of weight to lose myself before I'm in the, shape that I'd like to be, but not in bad shape by any means. But I'm a 40-year-old guy, and, my knees aren't as good as they used to be. So having a little bit of help is not a bad idea. Now, if you're younger and very fit, I have no doubt that you could handle this by yourself. But it will go a lot faster, and you will have a lot more fun if you can get a couple of friends to help you. And there were a couple of situations in particular that we ran into where I could not imagine trying to do it alone, particularly when we were doing the mixing and pouring of the actual cement. We pretty much needed a minimum of 2 guys at a couple of points, and having 3 made it so much easier. So if you can, get a couple of friends together and, offer to buy them pizza for dinner. That's what we did, or give them booze. We did both of those. So liquor them up and feed them pizza, and they should assist you. Outside of the tube, you're obviously going to need concrete. Now, how much really depends on what size tube you go with. But you also need to take into consideration that you get your hole deep enough to be past your local frost line. So, for example, in Charlotte, North Carolina, from everything that I've read, our frost line is somewhere between 12 and 18 inches. So we went 18 inches just to make sure we were well below that frost line. So it's not constantly freezing and thawing out at levels below the concrete, which could cause the pier to shift over time. Now, that being said, for me, with my 18-inch hole, along with the form around it, which was about 3x3, that's, the square form that went around the actual tube, plus the 4-foot tall concrete tube, which we ended up filling up to the top after setting it inside the hole. In total, we ended up using 9 bags. So I bought 10. Initially, I only bought 5 bags, but then I was thinking about it and I was like, 5 bags is not going to cut it. Maybe just for the tube, but we have to pour the foundation for the tube as well. So I think that was definitely the right move, going back and getting 5 more bags. If you think you might go deeper than 18 inches, if you live further north than North Carolina or 35 degrees, then perhaps, you go with 15 bags. I did the 50-pound bags of quikcrete, and they're about $5 to $6 a piece, depending on where you purchase them from. I got mine from the Home Depot. And just a little hint for you, you get a 10% military discount if you or a family member are in the military. My brother was with me and he served, so he was able to get me that discount. Very much appreciate that, Josh. Thank you, sir. Guys, I'm sorry about that clicking noise. I don't know why that keeps happening. I think it might have something to do with multiple inputs being on at the same time. I'm not 100% sure. I just went through and unplugged the other two lines that I'm not using currently to record, as I'm only using the microphone. I'd never had this issue before, though. Like in, the last 30 episodes that I've been using this exact setup, and all of a sudden I'm having all these clicking issues, and it's driving me nuts because, we obviously did quite a bit to make this setup exactly how I wanted it to be. And now I'm having issues, which is always fun. All right. So anyway, back to the pier. Obviously the sackcrete, 10 bags of that was about $60. The tube was $12, so very inexpensive for that. And there were a few other things that I had to purchase as well. The only thing that I really struggled with was the plates that I see on pretty much every photo that I've seen of a pier. You'll see that they have 2 metal plates with 4 bolts or 3 bolts. 3 bolts is actually ideal. I ended up having to use 4. Long story. That you use to actually set the mount itself on top of, or the pier adapter if you're using one. I ended up going on Amazon and I found these basically steel square plates that have pre-drilled 5/8 holes in them. I think it ended up, the holes were a little bit smaller than 5/8 because I went out and bought the big thick 5/8 lag bolts and was initially planning on using those, but I ended up having to do 3/8, which is a more standard tripod sized bolt. But that was perfectly fine. I had a 12-inch long 3/8 bolts that I was able to sink into the concrete, and they ended up working out perfectly. And then I used a combination of, various washers and nuts to get them permanently installed on the mount. And I'll get into exactly how I did that here in just a moment. So the plates had the 4 holes on the outside, but what they didn't have was a single hole in the middle for me to actually put the final 3/8 bolt through that I needed for my Star Adventure GTI mount. I'm planning on using my larger mount, my CEM26 on the pier. But unfortunately, my pier adapter did not arrive in time. So I wanted to be able to, use it while I'm waiting on that to come in the mail. So I ended up tapping and drilling a hole into the plate so I could add that additional 3/8 hole right in the middle. I basically just got a steel, what's the word that I'm looking for? A center punch. I couldn't think of it. But yeah, a center punch was used in the middle. And then after that, technically I should have used a drill press, but I didn't have a drill press. And my brother said, I'm the drill press. So I was like, okay, if you're confident in doing it. I did have a really good quality plug-in drill. I wouldn't have tried it with a cordless drill. Maybe if you've got like a really, really strong cordless drill, you could do it. But really, I would think a plug-in drill would be the way to go. So we used that along with a 3/8 titanium bit. Does have to be titanium in order to get through steel. And then we also used 3-in-1 oil. So essentially we tapped out the starting bit where we were going to drill. And then we put the titanium drill bit right in the middle. And then I basically squirted oil on while Josh drilled directly down. And within a few seconds, we were through that steel plate. So that way, we were able to punch our own hole in it. Which obviously we needed an extra one of for the mount itself. So basically, I was left with 2 steel plates, one with 4 holes on the edges, and then another with 4 holes on the edges and one in the middle that was 3/8. So I put the 4 long 12-inch bolts through the first plate. I should back up. I put 4 nuts on first, followed by, I'm trying to think of the order I did it in. I think I used wing nuts and regular nuts, a combination of the two, because the wing nuts are easier to use to level out. And essentially, you've got 8 wing nuts around one plate, along with 8 regular nuts, and then 8 wing nuts and 8 regular nuts around the other plate as well. And I know that seems like overkill, but I wanted to make sure it wouldn't budge at all and that I had, all the ability to level that I could possibly want. Now, that being said, we were very careful while pouring the cement and filling up the tube and everything to make sure that we kept everything as level as possible. The other thing that we needed were some 2x4s because we needed to build a concrete form around before we actually started sinking everything. Now, this is the part that I was kind of the most concerned with because I had watched a lot of videos on making piers. And on most of the videos, I kind of thought that people were going way overkill with their form builds. And I think it turned out to be correct. Now, maybe that's different if you use bigger than an 8-inch tube, but 8 inches is, a pretty substantial sized concrete pier. And we didn't need anything more than a square. So basically we made a square out of 2x4s. We set it into the square hole that we had dug. We leveled it out. So that way, it was level on all the edges. It wasn't perfect, but it was fairly level across, all sides. And then we dug out the center even more. So we would have room for that tube to sit deep inside the hole, about 18 inches. After that, we placed 4 pieces of rebar. So rebar is literally just pieces of steel that you can put inside the concrete tube or, any concrete to reinforce it. It's just used. It's literally reinforcement bars is what it stands for, I believe. Anyway, we used 4 pieces of rebar. We had the square form in place. And then after that, it was literally just a matter of getting the cement mixing. So we got the cement mixer probably about 5 feet from behind where we were going to be pouring. And luckily it was set up like a wheelbarrow so we could lift it and move it forward and back. This was a good thing because what I quickly found out is that concrete dust goes everywhere when you're pouring out a bag of concrete. Probably wear a mask. I offered N95 mask to everyone, but everyone was like, nah, I ain't wearing that. I guess they're tough guys and they wanted to breathe concrete. But if you just kind of back up when it comes out, you'll be fine. Don't take medical advice from me though, to be clear. Anyway, 2 bags of concrete at a time. So we started mixing it up. We got it to, I guess, what I would call a soupy consistency. It wasn't too dry. It wasn't too wet. I wanted to make sure it wasn't like sloppy wet, obviously. And you just kind of got to use your best judgment on that. You can always add more water, but you can't take away. So just keep that in mind when you're adding it. And then make sure that you've got a small, narrow shovel handy that you can use to dig into the concrete mixer as it's working, because what ends up happening is the dry cement gets stuck in the back and all your wet stuff will be up front, and you'll need to unplug the cement mixer and then get in there with the shovel and kind of loosen it all up, give it a little bit of a toss, then plug it back in and add water as needed. So we started by doing nothing but filling the hole. So we had the tube in place. We started pouring around the tube. And then once we had probably 6 inches of concrete, I would say, poured in, we started adding to the tube because I didn't want too much pressure to build up around the edge of the tube so it wouldn't crumple in on itself. Obviously, we already had the 4 pieces of rebar in. They were, pounded into the ground, not pounded, but literally just shoved into the ground a bit inside the tube and all, placed upright. And we started, filling it up and just going 2 bags at a time. Like I say, we ended up using 9 bags in total. I will tell you, I didn't have to use any 2x4s around the tube to hold it up and hold it in place. Pretty much every video that I watched, people did that. And I had wood set aside to do it, but it just didn't even occur to us when we were doing it because we were so busy filling everything up. But by the time that 8-inch tube was full, it wasn't going anywhere because, we had properly leveled it, and it had plenty of concrete at the bottom to support it. So I just didn't really see the need for it. And honestly, I don't think you will need it either. So don't feel like you need to go out and buy a whole bunch of wood to build a form around this, because if you can build a simple square inside of a hole, I think you'll be perfectly fine, because I certainly was. And I'll post pictures, obviously, in the links to the show notes, so you can go check it out. It'll be on the Facebook page. If you want to see it and don't have Facebook, shoot me an email, astrocast@gmail.com, and I will share a photo with you. But after we were filled up to the top, obviously you got to work quickly with quikcrete because it does start hardening very quickly. One big tip I can give you, let me pause while this is on my head. You want to set your plates up before you start pouring the concrete, because it's really the most tedious process of the whole thing, is getting all those nuts and bolts on in the right way. And if you had to do what I had to do while that concrete was sitting in the tube, you might run out of time and end up having to just put the 4 bolts in without the plate and hope that you get it right. And you don't want to do that. So in other words, you want to have the assembled pier mount, we'll call it, before you pour the concrete. So that way, when the concrete gets to the top of the tube, you can literally just place the whole thing in there and then jiggle it around a little bit until it's nice and level and in the middle of the tube, and then you're good. Now, what I ended up doing was, since it was kind of a soupy consistency, and the pier adapter thing that I had built out of the bolts and plates was pretty heavy. I was afraid it might sink a little bit, even though, the concrete's pretty thick. So I actually put a 2x4 on top of the pier, right, smack dab in the middle. And then the plate actually fit over the 2x4, even with the bolts in place. So it ended up working out perfectly. So I was able to leave that there. And then the next day I came out and I punched that 2x4 out. It slid right out. I just had to give it a little bit of pressure. I wish I could have gotten bigger bolts. That's the only thing that I would do differently if I could go back. I thought that the holes that came pre-drilled in those steel plates were big enough, but they weren't. So I had the big, beefy, galvanized steel bolts. I ended up having to use the 3/8 ones that were smaller, just because the holes weren't big enough on those plates. I want to say it was 5/8, the giant, bolts that I got that were like 18 inches long and all galvanized. But the pre-drilled holes also said 5/8, but they clearly weren't. I think they were 3/8. In any case, I'll do the measurements one of these days when I feel like getting the calipers out and measuring. But, after testing them a few days after everything had solidified, those things aren't going anywhere. They don't budge at all. So as long as you get them, a good 4 to 6 inches into that concrete, they're not going to budge. And steel is steel. So, I mean, whether it's very thick steel or very thin steel, chances are, you're 20, 30 pounds of gear that you're going to put on top of it, it's not going to break those 4 bolts. And if you really wanted to, you could, of course, tap and drill new holes and put in larger bolts at a later date. But just make sure that you have whatever you're going to use to hold your actual mount on top of that pier ready to go beforehand, because that was really the most difficult part of the whole process, because some of the nuts didn't want to go on right. And I had galvanized and non-galvanized steel, and the whole thing was just a little bit of a pain. I wish I had done it the night before. Of course I didn't, because I wasn't thinking about it. So prepare as much as you can in advance. couple other tips. I had a large, like an 8-foot folding table set out, and I had all the tools that we could possibly need set out in front of it. I had clamps. I had a skill saw, for cutting the 2x4s. I had a couple of hammers just in case we needed them. Lots of different hand tools, some vice grips. The vice grips came in handy for getting those nuts on that were being a pain. And just everything that you could need. A lot of cold water. Everybody was drinking lots of water because it was hot. But, at the end of the day, after about 3 hours, we had poured everything. We got the pier head adapter properly in place. We had that 2x4 there, so it stayed nice and level. I let the whole thing cure for 3 days before I even messed with it at all. We ended up having rain 2 days after. I think it would have been perfectly fine to sit out in the rain, but I put the tarp over it just to be extra cautious. Another thing to remember is you don't want a brand new poured concrete pier to get rained all over. And when I say brand new, I mean like within the last 12 hours. That's not a good idea because it can absorb more water and then end up cracking in areas because of it. So, if you've got 1 day on the weekend and a couple of friends to help you, if you've got 1 day without rain, you'll be perfectly fine. As long as you have a tarp that you can toss over it the next day, then you'll be in good shape. That's all I was missing was literally 1 day without rain and a couple of friends. And then we were able to knock it out in just a few hours. It really, I don't know why I had made it out to be this huge, obstacle that needed to be overcome in my head. But for whatever reason, I had done that over the last year, and it ended up being, pretty non-eventful. It was a fairly simple project, and it was a lot of fun. We got together, we had fun. My favorite parts about the pier, let me tell you about them. So as I said earlier, we had a square base that we had built the form around that we placed the tube inside. And that square base was about 3 by 3 feet, if I had to estimate. Therefore, we had a nice smooth surface of wet concrete that was drying after we finished up. And there's only one thing that you can do with wet concrete. And that's obviously put your handprint on it. So I told everyone who, helped, and my wife, obviously, who helps me with everything in life, to put their handprints on the concrete, to sign it, as being somebody who literally lent a hand to help us build the, beginning step of my observatory. My brother Josh also had brought a friend over of his named Taylor. And I let her put her handprint in because she was there and it meant a lot to her. I could tell. So I was like, yeah, go ahead and get in on it. We had a room. But the really cool part was I went and got my dog Bane. He is going to be 10 in July, and he's getting up there in age. He's a gray border collie now. Very gray. He's got gray eyebrows and everything. And, he's been my best friend for a decade. So I got his paw print in the concrete right beside mine, and that meant a lot. That was really, really cool. And I don't know, that just means a lot because, as long as I'm in this home, I'm going to use that pier. It'll be here forever. And I know, Bane won't be here forever. He'll be here with us for, a few more years if we're lucky. But I know we're getting near the end of his life. So being able to have his paw print on my pier, that means a whole lot to me. We also got Loki's paw print on there as well. Our other dog, who is, just as important to me as Bane, but he's a little bit younger. He's only 5 compared to Bane, who's going to be 10. So that was a lot of fun, just a little thing to think about. Make sure you put some kind of signature in your concrete. You might as well, get your handprint in there and then just wash it off afterwards. I will say, concrete gets everywhere. It's a lot like sand at the beach, it just gets everywhere, and it will be in your mouth. It'll be in your hair. It'll be in your shorts. It just got everywhere. So I was thrilled to take a shower later that night. I was sitting there relaxing, reading a comic later in the night, and I took a sip of my water bottle and I was like, oh God, what is that? And I felt something gritty, and somehow I had gotten, I guess concrete on my straw, my water bottle. I don't know, but it made its way into my mouth like 6 hours after we had finished. So yeah, just be cognizant of that stuff will get everywhere. my other favorite thing about the observatory has to be the name. So actually, I put a call out to you guys and all my friends on Facebook when we had the temporary pier set up with the cinder blocks, just asking if anyone had ideas for names for the observatory. And I got a lot of funny names back about cinder blocks. And after I explained that it's not going to be cinder blocks all the time, I got some other names. One friend of the show actually had recommended a tower name because he is a big fan of Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, obviously. And I'm actually, side note, I am finally getting around to listening to the first book. It is very, very good. I got it on Audible. And first of all, the audiobook is really good. The narrator who does that book does a excellent job. But we'll get to that at the end of the episode because that's actually this week's recommendation. But we'll get back to that. Anyway, the tower idea kind of stuck in my head, and I liked the idea of something with towers, but I couldn't really. I'm not that big of a Lord of the Rings fan where I would name, my observatory after it, but I am that big of a Stephen King fan. So it hit me like a ton of lightning. At the same time, I said Dark Towers Observatory, and so that's the name of the Astrocast Observatory. It's officially the Dark Towers Observatory. So I think at some point we'll have to have a second pier because you can't call it towers if there's only one. But that is it. So Dark Towers Observatory. It's got all of our handprint signatures on it. It always will. It's got Bane's signature on it. It currently has my Star Adventure GTI on there, along with my ASCAR SQA-55 telescope. That's an astrograph, phenomenal scope. So glad that I got that when I did because it's more expensive now. And then my ASI 294 MC Pro camera. So I did order a mini pier for the CEM26. Unfortunately, CEM26 parts are kind of hard to come by because it's not one of the more mainstream popular mounts, and it is a few years old at this point. So most people have newer mounts. So I had not a lot to choose from. They do make a small pier though that you can make 5 inches or 8 inches that will allow you to attach directly to like a mounting plate that I'm going to be using. So I ordered one of those rather than try to take apart my tripod and use that. Definitely didn't want to do that, but the CEM26, it's not just a simple 3/8 screw that goes into the bottom like it is for the GTI. A little bit more complicated than that. So as much as I try to think of a homemade way to do it, I just didn't want to mess with it. And I figured spend a few bucks here, get the proper pier mount for it. And that way your gear will be nice and secure. So no matter what mount you're doing, make sure you put a lot of thought into how you are going to connect that mount to your pier, because that was the biggest question that I had going into this. And I don't really have great answers coming out of it. I managed to make it work, luckily, with mine. But your mileage may vary depending on what you do. So yeah, we wrapped up probably around, 6 p.m., ordered some pizzas, had a few drinks, sat around, talked for a while, and I checked on it the next morning. By then it was, one giant rock, but I could still see little areas that looked like they still had some moisture in them. And like I say, I left the whole thing alone for 3 days before I messed with it at all. Better safe than sorry. I know it was probably perfectly fine to use the day after, but figured I'd give it a few days to cure. And, truth be told, it probably takes a month for it to fully cure, but perfectly fine to use as of now. So I ended up using it last night. I got everything set up and I am extremely happy with the results. Everything just came out wonderful. I ended up imaging Markarian's chain last night. I got about 180 exposures on it. Now that I have the pier, I plan to spend a lot more time on each of my targets because I'm going to have the opportunity to do that. Hopefully, knock on wood, as long as there's not too many clouds. But yeah, guys, if it's something you've been thinking about doing, I can tell you, it's not that hard. It's really not. So don't be afraid if you're not a very handy person. I'm a pretty handy guy. I'm a very much a do-it-yourself kind of person. I'd rather do a job myself than pay someone to do it. Usually, like we changed a light fixture in our house this weekend in the foyer. Stuff like that around the house, I always try to do myself if I can. The one area I draw the line at is plumbing. I don't mess with plumbing. I had a disaster situation trying to install a bidet a few years ago. And ever since then, I just say no when it comes to water. I am not going to do it. So if you're, relatively handy, if you know your way around basic tools and you got a couple of friends that can help, you can get your pier done for, under a couple $100 tops. I think, I probably bought more stuff than I actually needed. Looking back, obviously I ended up with, some titanium bits that I didn't use. Those aren't cheap. They're like $30 a pop, depending on the size. I didn't use the PVC pipe. I initially planned on running a channel through the middle of the tube, so I could route cables through it. I decided against that at the last minute though, because I had a 4-inch PVC pipe and the diameter was only 8 inches. So I didn't want half the diameter being taken up by a tube. And honestly, it's not that big of a deal to me to have one power cable hanging down the pier instead of on the inside. Not going to make a huge difference to me. So, if you plan accordingly, got a few friends that can help you, rent a concrete mixer. Again, please rent a concrete mixer. It makes your life so much easier. Then you too can have a permanently installed pier and start doing a lot more astronomy and astrophotography as soon as you want. I'm so pumped that I'm going to have this for nebula season. I cannot wait to do like 40 hours on one target. I've never been able to do that. I think my longest project thus far is about 8 hours. I pride myself on being able to pull out a lot of data with a little bit of exposure. Most of my photos are 4 hours or less, and I think I do a pretty good job with that data, especially considering it's usually from Bortle 7 skies. But now that I've got, all the time in the world, so to speak, on the pier, I'll be able to do higher quality images, no doubt. And another thing that I ordered along with the mini pier for the CEM 26 is I got a new T-ring for my Canon R5. I guess I can use it with, RF mount. So I could use it with the R7 or the R5. But I got a Founder Optics 42 millimeter, so M42 size, low profile T-ring adapter for Canon R cameras. So that was only $18, and now I'll be able to hook up my R5 directly to my SQA55, which should give me a much wider field of view since it's a full frame camera. And I'm very excited to do some testing with the R5. I am planning on getting it astro modified after a lot of soul searching and research, determining that I will be able to use it as, a regular wildlife camera still just as easily with my RF 100 to 500 L lens. Once I, kind of verified that is indeed the case, and I'll be able to continue using it that way, I said, why not? So before I get that done, I want to do some kind of before and after shots. So, I wish it was nebula season, because then we'd have all the strong hydrogen alpha nebula out. But they are starting to rise. The Milky Way is starting to come up about 4 o'clock in the morning right now. So if you're up early, you can absolutely start to catch nebula. So maybe I'll just, get up early or set my pier to automatically start around 4 a.m. There's so much I have planned to do. I'm going to definitely go Nina or K-Stars. I was trying to remember the name. I haven't decided which one yet. I don't know. I might do K-Stars, because whenever Rick and Jeff from Dark Dragons showed me that application, I was really blown away by some of the features. But then again, I haven't used Nina in a while either, and I'm sure it's had its fair share of updates as well. So either way, I'm definitely going to have a thin client PC out there that is going to be running a lot more than just the ASI Air. Whether or not I will continue to use the ASI Air. I suppose I probably will, because ultimately the CEM26 is what's going to be on the permanent mount. And I want to keep the GTI so I can use that for, traveling to dark sky locations. When I go down to the observatory, for instance, I want to bring my astrograph, and all I need is a small mount for that. So I can absolutely do that with the GTI. Once I have a more permanent setup though, and like a small building around where I can leave a computer outside, then I'm definitely going to start messing with other software. And that is going to give us, more things to talk about on the show and more options to consider other than, the ASI Air, which is what we typically talk about on the Astrocast. I want to take a moment and give a shout out to a friend of the show who recently joined the Patreon. If you would like to support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/the Astrocast. Feel free to donate $1 or $5 or whatever you want per month. There's a couple of people that I would like to shout out that have done some pretty awesome stuff in the last week as of today. Anyhow, Ben, thank you so much for what you've done. I won't get into specifics, but I greatly, greatly appreciate that. And then I also want to shout out a new friend of the show, Mark. Mark reached out to me. He sent me a very thoughtful letter that really touched me. Really awesome hearing from you guys. It means so much to me whenever someone reaches out to me and tells me that the Astrocast has done something meaningful for them in any way. And it's not the first time I've heard it, and I hope it won't be the last time that I hear it, but every time I do, it reinforces why I do this show, because I do it with the hopes of reaching as many ears as possible and getting more people to look up at the night sky and realize, just how incredible it is. So shout out to you, Mark. Glad you're back home safely in Chicago. Your trip was absolutely incredible. More to come on that in the near future, but thank you also for joining the Patreon. Very, very much appreciate it. And it's awesome to have you in the chat. If you don't know, our Discord chat is really awesome these days. So if you join the Patreon, you get access to the Astrocast Society Discord. And we recently have a new member who's joined it by the name of Captain Cumulus. And he's pretty hilarious. So I won't give any spoilers out, but if you want to ever chat with the captain, he is certainly there. And then obviously all of us are in there. Astrocast, Ben, Chris, Dr. Schweizer. I mean, I could go on. All of you guys are great. Thank you all so much for supporting the show. Kelly, obviously, Kelly's our female person in the group. I always say thanks, guys, and Kelly whenever we're in the group. But we've had other women come and go in the group, but Kelly's the current person who keeps up with us and talks the most. So just want to give a shout out to all you guys. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Another cool thing that I'll be able to announce pretty soon is we are about to have the first merch for the Astrocast. So I have been trying to find a good supplier for clothing items. I really wanted to find something that isn't just drop shipped garbage, but it's not easy to do in this day and age. So what I've done is I've ordered samples from a few different places. They all should be here within the next week. And then I hope to make my decision on a vendor shortly thereafter. And my only goal with this is to keep the cost affordable so everybody who wants one can have one, and also for it not to be bad quality. It can't be bad quality. I don't want people getting anything with the show's name on it that is of crap quality. So I hope to have a new item once per quarter available. That's what I'm going to aim for. We're going to start with probably just something simple like a t-shirt, but no doubt we will do a hoodie at some point that you can wear out in the field whenever you want. Maybe we'll do a beanie, astronomy related clothing essentially is what we're going to be aiming for. So something to look forward there. Definitely keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. And obviously I will tell you more as it develops. I kind of feel like a jerk. I only named a few people, and we've got a lot of people in our chat. So let me shout out everybody real quick. Sarek, Chris, Keaton, Alex, Ben, Mark, Dr. Schweizer, Kelly, Mike, Nathan, Skip, Steve, Tim, Mutus, Martin, Girl Nerd 77. I don't know where you've been. You've disappeared. You've been gone quite a while. Come say hi sometime. Don't leave Kelly all alone in here with us weirdos. So shout out to you guys. Thank you so much for always being there for me. I try to be active and engaged on the Discord as often as possible, but we all work full-time jobs. We're all super busy, so you know how it is. But thank you guys so much for supporting the show. It really does mean a lot to me. So yeah, I kind of buried the lead earlier on the recommendation for this week, didn't I? I am indeed listening to The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, but I can tell you a little bit more about it. This is specifically the Audible version. Well, I don't know if it's an Audible version, but I got it on Audible, and it's narrated by one Andy Serkis, I believe is how that name is pronounced. And man, he does a good job narrating. He is one of the best narrators I have ever heard. I started listening to this. They have a full voice cast version. And honestly, I wasn't that big of a fan of it. I started listening to it and I couldn't get into it. I went over to kind of the standard audiobook model, listened to that, and completely fell in love with it. So definitely enjoying that. I'm probably a third of the way through the book so far. They're on the road singing, meeting people. Yeah, it's a great book. So everything that you've heard is true. I can't wait to finish the whole series and kind of, understand all the lore, because obviously I've seen the movies. But reading the books and seeing the movies is two very different things. So definitely check that out. If you somehow haven't, if you're like me, definitely recommend the Audible version. As for affiliate partners, as I mentioned last week on the show, we are no longer just affiliated with High Point Scientific, but we are also partnered with Agena Astro now. So if you find something on Agena that is not available on High Point or vice versa, please feel free to use the link in the show notes to purchase those. Basically, the show gets just a small cut of the sale. You don't pay anything more. And you get to help support the show. We've gotten actually quite a few sales through the High Point link. And I just really appreciate you guys doing that. That's just a little bit extra that goes towards, paying for the bills around the show, hardware, software, hosting cost, etc. So very, very much appreciate any purchases that you make through there. I'm still trying to get Adorama on board. I don't know what's taken so long. I kind of filled out everything for that a couple weeks ago now, and I still haven't heard back. So I'll probably reach out to them pretty soon and just see what's going on. But Adorama is next. I'm also going to try to get First Light Optics on board, because I realize we have a lot of listeners in Europe, and FLO is one of the best suppliers out there. And they honestly have a lot of stuff that is not available on other websites. The Rokinon M42 bayonet for the Rokinon 135 lens that allows you to do a standard M42 adapter instead of, a Canon or Nikon mount, which in turn completely removes the tilt that you experience, because I had a ton of tilt on my Rokinon 135 before installing that M42 bayonet. I could only find that at First Light Optics. So, they do have some unique stuff there as well. So definitely, give them a look if you're looking for something that's not available elsewhere. Finally, one other thing I want to mention is we do have a call-in line now. I know I said it a couple of weeks ago, but I want to mention it again because we haven't gotten any calls yet. And I'm kind of really surprised by that, because I get so many emails and messages and everything else. I thought for sure one of you guys would call in and leave a message saying, hey, Roo, talk about this, or, what about that? So I'm going to put it out there one more time. I'm just going to speak it out into the universe, and what comes will come. That phone number is 427-5766. Or it's 866-4ASK-ROO. That's ASKROO. But again, 866-427-5766. Please give me a call, leave a message, question, comment. If you just want to say hi, I would very much appreciate it. And if it's a good question, I'll play it back on the show. So just another little fun thing that we can experience together. So I feel like I've been talking a mile a minute for the last hour, and I'm fairly sure that I have. I do want to say we did get a request in our Q&A section of the Discord to do an episode more about basics. And when I say basics, I mean a tripod and a DSLR. And we are going to get into that on next week's episode. I knew I wanted to cover the pier this week just because it's fresh in my head and I've got everything, right there in my short-term memory. So I grabbed a hold of it. But that topic will be covered on next week's episode in depth. So if that's something that you're interested in hearing about, how to get good results with just a DSLR and a tripod, and then obviously a few other little things that I will throw in as I always do, definitely make sure to tune into the Astrocast next week. So let me think. Is there anything else that I am forgetting? I don't think I am, guys. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think so. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in this week, as always. Thank you so much for listening to the Astrocast. I hope that you've got great weather outside. I know Leo is high in the sky. He's looking very mighty this time of year. Leo is definitely in charge, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. So definitely get those telescopes pointed up. Check out Markarian's chain. Check out all of the galactic region in and around Leo. It's incredible. Get on Stellarium, pick an area, and slew your telescope to it. You won't regret it. Expose. So you guys know what to do. But thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Astrocast. I am your host, Rue, and as always, clear sky.